Hey everybody, thanks for coming out. I'm Dave Goldberg. I'm the chair of the Ridgefield Affordable Housing Committee. Before we get started, I have a couple of things I wanted to address. First, there's some questions posted online about the corporate legality of this session. It was noticed. There was not an agenda presented because it was my understanding that an information session is required for the agenda. It's called information and community input on affordable housing. It's clear what the agenda is. But I have checked. And however, out of an abundance of caution, this is not a meeting. There is not a quorum on affordable housing committee members here tonight. So this is simply a public information question and answer session. It's being recorded. Those members who are not here tonight will watch the videotape, so all your comments and questions will be preserved and passed through. So I'm the chair. We have members of Ken Blower, vice chair, who is here. Cheryl Knapp, who is secretary, not here. Kevin Brown, not here. Campbell, not here. Chair Coleman, not here. Deborah Francis-Gatchet is here. Gordon Zola is here. And Krista Willett is not here. Second thing I wanted to address is Prospect Ridge, because I saw that there was some confusion, and that's probably from an article in the press that's not entirely clear. This is not about that. We'll certainly talk about that and bring up to date on where we are. Tomorrow night is the Affordable Housing Committee. It will be a webcast. You can watch it. You can ask questions if there's sufficient time at the end. At that time, we will be looking at a preliminary map that tells us what is the buildable area on the property question. So I think a lot of the questions, at least some of them, will be answered tomorrow night. So I urge you to attend. Go to the next slide. We're talking about the process. So we're talking tonight about the affordable housing plan. Now, under a state law, and we'll talk about this in a while, we're required to create a plan by 2022 and update it every 5 years. We're starting now. There's been some preliminary work, some data analysis, but we're starting today with a public meeting. There will be a community survey. There will be committee planning sessions. They will probably be virtual, but they'll certainly be public. There will be a draft report in January. Public information about what's in the draft report through February and March. So the plan revisions in April. In May, there will be a public hearing, vote to adopt the plan, and then it will be submitted to the state. Are there any questions about that process specifically? Great. It is my pleasure to introduce Glenn Schulter from Planometrics. Glenn is a planner and has worked extensively with Ridgefield for about 20 years or more. Yes, you were a kid when you started. And he will be guiding us through the process. And I'm happy to say we were awarded a planning grant by the Department of Housing, which enabled us to bring in Glenn so that we can make sure that we provide the best solution possible for Ridgefield. So with that, I'm going to introduce Glenn. He will take you through a presentation, and then we will have questions and comments.
Thank you, Dave. Good to meet you. My name is Glenn Schulter. I'm with a professional planner with a firm called Planometrics. As Dave indicated, I have had a chance to work with the town on a number of projects. And I think most significantly, I worked with them around 2005 in terms of comprehensive rewrite of zoning regulations in the three-town plans, 1999, 2010, and the most recent 2020. So through that process, I gained some familiarity with Ridgefield. So I'm hopeful that that will allow us to have a great conversation today in terms of affordable housing and affordable housing plan. So We have put together a PowerPoint here tonight, and the main purpose is to try to provide some basic information about this process and work that's going on, but then quickly get to question and answer so that we can have a discussion, because our purpose here tonight is to hear from you. So just some background, in 2017, the state legislature passed a public act that said all 169 municipalities in the state have to prepare an affordable housing plan, and it can't be older than 5 years. And so here we are, basically 5 years later, and 169 towns around the state are all working on this because it's due to be adopted by June 1 of 2022. So that is the operative date that Ridgefield is also working on. The statute indicates that such plan shall specify how the municipality intends to increase the number of affordable housing developments in the municipality, and so that is the focus and the direction that the state has directed. And the plan will need to be updated every 5 years in the future. So the plan of conservation and development is updated every 10, this plan is every 5, so that's sort of an indication that the state is placing on these documents. Now, studying housing in Ridgefield is not new. The town has been involved in understanding the resident affordable housing issues for the past, at least the past 25 years. The Blue Cover Report, I believe, was from 1999, and the housing study, I believe, moving over was in 2014. So these issues have been looked at before. And in fact, when we go back to the plans of conservation and development from the 1960s all the way through the most recent one in 2020, housing has always been a component of the plans in terms of issues facing Ridgefield at that time. In the 1960s and 70s, it was the explosive growth that was happening in town. One of the facts that always fascinated me about Ridgefield is that in the 60s, the town was building an elementary school every year because that's the kind of growth that was going on. So the plans need to be relevant to the issues of the day. So why prepare an affordable housing plan? There's a couple of reasons. First of which is the state has told us to. And secondly, everybody needs housing, so understanding what people's housing needs are is important. And everybody needs housing that's affordable, that they can afford it. It's available when needed. Having a house available in 2 or 3 years couldn't work for people. And one that provides options and choices for people depending on where they are in their lives. And people benefit from having housing that's available to them. In a survey, a statewide survey, 43% recognize that housing and diversity housing choices provides 43%, highlighted that it provides individual stability and security. 18% talk about protecting themselves from rising rents. 17% identify housing as a way for wealth accumulation, and others commented on leaving something to future generations, better educational opportunities, and better health outcomes. So housing is an important part in all aspects of our lives. And for people who have housing, they accept it that they have housing. But for people who are struggling with housing, there could be some questions there as well. There are many ways that the community benefits from housing as well. Provides housing options for people throughout their lives, so they might be born in one kind of house, and then as they grow up and go to school or college, their first jobs have other housing, and then they go through life, larger housing traded up, and then perhaps at a certain time in their life, trading back down again to a smaller home. So having these kinds of housing options are helpful for people for their whole lives. It promotes community togetherness, and it also promotes a stronger economy. So housing is a key element of Ridgefield and other communities as well. Now, often there's a misunderstanding about what affordable housing is. And the way the state defines affordable housing is important just to touch on so that we recognize what we're talking about. So for anybody in this room or anybody generally, housing is considered to be affordable if you spend less than 30% of your income on it. Now, if you're earning a significant amount of money, you may choose to spend more than 30% and you could afford to do so. If you're earning the median income or less, now housing, if it's more than 30% of So when the state talks about affordable housing and thinking about affordable housing, what they're talking about is housing which is at 80% or less of the median income for the area. And for Ridgefield, a family of four, the median income is considered to be the Ridgefield region, okay, the area. There's a median income of $102,000, and so 80% is $82,000, and 60% is another threshold is roughly $60,000. So this is the type of situation that could be typical wages for people. You think about people who may work locally, maybe hourly, two-wage earners, that this $82,000 is probably two people working full-time at $20 an hour or more. And how can they afford housing? So that's the first thing, is to think about income levels that this refers to. And then the second thing is what people or housing industry sell for, to be affordable to people with those income levels. Whoops, I'm sorry. So when we go through the mathematics, which are defined by the state in terms of calculating this, generally speaking, we're talking about rents which would have to be below about $1,300 to $1,700. Let's just talk about $1,500 roughly as being those numbers. In Ridgefield, the median rent is about $1,700, so it's close, kind of in the ballpark. It's not too bad. But when we look at sale prices and go through the math, even today, historically low interest rates, the sale prices that people can afford based on those income levels are somewhere in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. The median housing price is about $650,000. So there is a housing cost challenge in the community overall, and that's what's being looked at. Now, the issue of housing affordability has also grown and changed over time. This is a chart comparing income to house price, median income to median sales price of houses from 1968 to 2020. And generally speaking, this rule of thumb, which is about a ratio of about a little over 3 times, right? Your house is 3 times your income, if you will. So back in the 1960s, housing was relatively affordable, even at interest rates at that time, because the sale price of the house was sort of in a close ratio to what people's incomes were. But ironically, as the baby boomers, who is the baby boomer? Hi, everybody. Well, we're being after. But as people in the baby boom generation started to come into the age categories where they were interested in buying houses, what happened was started to put pressure on the housing market faster than the market could respond. And as a result, we started to see a rise to the rule of thumb area of affordability. It fluctuated over time. You better remember wind inflation now. Political stand in the 70s, etc. But what we see now is that really since about the turn of the century, the housing spiked and the housing boom that crashed in 2006. Here we are again. And this data only goes to 2018, is missing the COVID bump, which has come along and continued. So generally speaking, housing used to be readily affordable. So for some people in this room, I'm not dating anybody, but it's quite possible your first house would have been readily affordable at the time you bought. Imagine today coming into a market where in fact the median house price is up to $650, and the challenge that can create in terms of housing affordability. So the world has changed, and affordability has become a bigger concern overall. And actually, there's no one that.
So can you move the microphone on that?
Thank you. I guess getting lazy as I went. So we talked about the rule of thumb affordability and Ridgefield's ratio based on this data. The most recent data was available. The ratio is up over 4. It is higher in San Francisco and other places around the country, but that's their problem. We have our own set of issues here. So the bottom line I wanted to kind of impress upon is that more and more people are finding it harder and harder to be able to afford housing. It may or may not be a crisis. You might read in some of the magazines, the housing crisis, etc. But it is a concern in Ridgefield, it's a concern with the Affordable Housing Committee, because it includes people who already live here, who are struggling with the cost of living. The United Way does a study of communities around the state, what they call their ALICE study. And so ALICE, up here, I know you can't read that, I apologize. ALICE is an acronym for asset limited, so people don't have a lot of savings, if you will. Income constrained, so they're not making a whole boatload of money, but they are employed. So asset limited, income constrained employed is ALICE. And there's 22% of the population of Ridgefield, people who live here today, who fall into the ALICE category or below. Either below the poverty level, or they're earning more than the poverty level, but less than the basic cost of living. So almost 1/5 to 1/4 of our population in Ridgefield today is already struggling with the cost of housing. And then when we go into the census data section, start looking at what's happening. What we find is about 31% of all Ridgefield households are housing cost burdened. What that means is they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Now, realistically, if they're earning $75,000 or more, you can see that there's about 15% that are spending more than 30% of their income. So perhaps that could be a choice, correct? But if you're earning less than $75,000, somewhere between 80 and 100% of those households in Ridgefield are housing cost burdened today as owners, or somewhere between 77 and 92% if they're renters are housing cost burdened. So these are people who live here today and already struggling with the cost of housing. Now you might say that affordability doesn't really affect you, or doesn't affect Ridgefield that much. I'd just like to suggest a couple of things to help you think about ways that it might. The median age in Ridgefield has gone from 30 in 1960 to 45 in the year 2020. Now what that means, median age means half the population is older and half the population is younger. Now, if the median age is getting older, hello, baby boomers, right? That's us. We're living longer, healthier lives than generations before us did, so we're accumulating in the upper age groups, yes. But the other reason is partly because younger people can't afford to buy here. They can't afford to live here because the housing is not available. So we're not becoming an assisted living facility, but our median age is changing the dynamics in terms of what's going on in town. School enrollments are declining or decreasing for a reason, and other things are also going on in terms of the mix of municipal services. Now, as I indicated, you also had a chance to work on Ridgefield's town plan in 1999. And as I studied the data for that, I observed in the journey to work information. This means where do Ridgefield residents work, and where do workers in Ridgefield come from. And what we have every day, I joke, is the tide coming in and going out. Ridgefield residents tend to work south and west, so they come every day in that direction, and the workers who come in come from the north and east. The people in town say, well, geez, traffic's a problem. Part of the reason is because 100% of our population is changing over on a regular basis. We're going places more than a week. So the fact that we don't have affordable housing can affect traffic and traffic flow. And the second thing is that I'm sure you've seen signs around town help wanted. And the reason is it's hard for businesses to hire workers if in fact they have to keep long distances together. So just some things to think about. Now, in terms of our housing stock overall, about 80% of Ridgefield's housing stock is single-family detached homes on lots, and about 20% is townhouses or condominiums or multiple unit types of buildings. And compared to the county and the state, our housing mix is overrepresented in single family and doesn't have as much diversity in other types of housing. And the reason the Baskin Robbins logo is up here is because Baskin Robbins has 31 flavors of ice cream. But Ridgefield doesn't need 31 flavors of housing, but perhaps we can have more. If we were all to go to Baskin Robbins today, some people would want vanilla, some would want chocolate, buttercream, pistachio, all the choices and flavors. But in Ridgefield, 80%, it's like soup knots or whatever, right? That we end up in a situation is no soup for you, no housing for you, living on what we have available. So housing diversity is a way to help address the housing needs of a variety of people. 86% of Ridgefield's housing is owner occupied, and again, it's $650,000 median price, less affordable. 14% of housing is rental and more affordable, but there are fewer units. Compared to the county, we have about a half, or maybe 40% of what the county and the state have in terms of other types of housing. I don't think Ridgefield has to match what the state and the county do, but perhaps some other types of housing choices or options might be a good thing. The state keeps a tabulation about the number of affordable housing units in municipalities around the state. And the Department of Housing credits Ridgefield with 287 state-recognized affordable units. You have to recognize that this number is changing all the time for a couple of different reasons. There's 175 what are called assisted housing units, and these are most of the Ridgefield Housing Authority projects in town, the developments and units which they own and manage. There's 69 deed-restricted units, 36 units where people, moderate, low moderate purchasers have gotten a CHFA mortgage, which allows them to have a smaller down payment or preferred interest rate, etc. There's also 7 units in town which are rental assistance unit, where people receive financial assistance from the state. And so all of these, at this time, or the most recent state report, credit Ridgefield with 287 units. And that, just going back a second, is that percentage is 3% of our housing stock. The reason that that's significant is that perhaps I've heard people refer to this term. Everybody heard of 830G?
Yes.
The basic premise of 830G, the state decided back in 1989, so that's 30 years ago, the state decided that if the community has less than 10% of its housing stock meeting those criteria that I just described, that developments which are providing affordable housing and meeting certain criteria do not have to comply with local zoning. They can only be denied for reasons of public health and safety. So, Ridgefield is not at the 10%, we're subject to 830G. Because of production that occurred within the community, we got enough what are called housing unit equivalent points to get a 4-year moratorium back in 2014. But that's 4 years, and guess what? It expired in 2018. So now we're subject to 830G again until we can produce more units or get to 10%. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind overall. So now we get a chance to kind of get to the synthesis a little bit, and I think what the Affordable Housing Committee is pondering is what can we do and what should we do? And so the first step, as the state has indicated here, is let's prepare a plan. So the potential housing vision that the Affordable Housing Committee is pondering is a goal statement perhaps, seek to provide a variety of housing choices in Ridgefield for people and families of all ages, income, and characteristics, and strive to become a more complete community. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The strategies which are being contemplated, and why we're here tonight to get your thoughts and feedback are fall into a couple of different categories. Whoops, I'm sorry. So the first of which is continue to implement the plan of conservation and development. We're not starting from scratch with a lot of these strategies. Some of these strategies have been in the plan of conservation and development for 10 or 20 years, and they're certainly in the 2020 fields. Look at ways to increase assisted housing, as I described earlier. That's what the housing authority is responsible for. Look at ways to increase deed-restricted housing, and that's the way that we've gotten moratoriums through the reduction of units. Look at ways to increase overall housing diversity, even if it doesn't meet the state criteria. Maybe we could have more basket broad flavors of housing. And then also paying attention to design. That's been an important issue. Now, in the POCA, there is a chapter called Guide Residential Development, and the sort of major premise of that is to address housing that is affordable. So many of these strategies in here, and I know the text is small, and I apologize for that, not readable from the back, for people from the back end of the later. But this document's available on the town website. I urge you to go look at it. But many of these strategies here are about the need for diversifying our housing portfolio, looking for ways to try to promote creation and construction of additional types of affordable housing units, seek to retain these restricted units for a longer period, so the affordability restrictions do not expire. And those down here, the red text, are action steps. And one of the action steps is what we're doing here today, which is prepare an official affordable housing plan as required under the statute. So these strategies are in place today, and I think the current consensus that we're going to continue or recommend continuing in that direction. Inland conservation development is also a matter of Ridgefield. So what we have here, Route 7 is right over here. There's Ranchville down here. Here's Ridgefield Center. This is the intersection of Route 7 and 35. Major area is up here. High school is right there. So I think hopefully that gives a line over here. So that gives you a sense of Ridgefield. The plan identifies these blue areas. And the blue areas here in the POCD are called potential housing opportunity focus area. Based on existing or potential sewer service area, these areas are meant to be illustrative of potential locations for affordable housing or housing opportunity rather than definitive. Because services are available here or train stations are available here, the general thinking in the adoption of the POCD is these are the areas of town which are most suitable for this type of housing. Now, they 30G, people can propose housing anywhere. But I think our thought is to try to advocate for approaches that would encourage housing that would help support the town center and provide for housing in a walkable, pedestrian-friendly type of environment, and also where transit's available. There are strategies related to assisted housing. Assisted housing is housing which receives financial assistance from the government, the state or federal government, generally speaking, and also housing occupied by persons receiving rental assistance. And so this is government housing provided by sort of three entities. The housing authority is one, but the other can be nonprofit or for-profit developers who receive state or federal funding in exchange for providing affordable housing. The financing requires this. So there are ways, I think I indicated, if I remember the number correctly, there's 175 units that we have in town, and perhaps there could be ways for us to investigate how to do this, much as we've done this before. We've done 175 units before. So that's one flavor that the Affordable Housing Committee is thinking about. And another one is this concept of deemed restricted housing. And deemed restricted housing, assisted housing, as I was just talking about, is generally housing that is going to stay affordable for an extended period of time. Deemed restricted may expire. It can be encouraged, enabled, incentivized, or required as part of new development. The units are deemed restricted to people earning 80% or less of the income. It's some percentage of units. It's generally around 10, 20, or 30% of the units that fall into this category. The state statutes indicate that the restriction should be for at least 4 years or perhaps even longer. And then there's a separate box here for what's called a set-aside development. In this box, planning and zoning rules can apply. We can set what those rules are, but we might encourage affordable housing. Over here, a developer can file an application, doesn't necessarily have to comply, provided that they meet some of these criteria. So these are the developments that can occur in places and ways that we may not fit. Another strategy is looking at ways to increase overall housing diversity. Some families, their circumstances have changed, whether it be through divorce or death or other situations where kids graduate from high school, empty nesters, etc. We can have older households downsizing, younger people or families starting out looking for housing, smaller units for smaller households. Census data tends to show that about 60% of the housing units in communities are occupied by 1 or 2 people. And again, some of the houses in town are perhaps larger than might normally happen for 1 or 2 people. And more housing choices which are less expensive. And so perhaps there might be ways in Ridgefield that we can encourage other types of housing flavors to address other types of housing needs, just so people can have choices. It might vary by size, by cost, by tenure, amenities or maintenance or other things like that. We've talked with the Affordable Housing Committee, the concept of how important design can be. And we've talked about some types of housing that might be appropriate for Ridgefield, and in certain places, provided the design is good. It could be what are called cottage courts or pocket neighborhoods, or small two-family or small apartment buildings, mixed-use buildings. And here we have examples of buildings in Ridgefield already, which contain affordable units. And you see the fit of the fabric of the community. Perhaps we can emulate maybe more of those in the future. Now, many people have concerns about the concept of affordable housing. So I would encourage anybody who does have concerns to do some additional research. There are some wonderful sources out there. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition contains a lot of information to address common concerns with regard to affordable housing. AARP has put together a wonderful booklet called Making Minimum Housing for a Changing America. And it's not just about retired people, but it talks about the changing age demographics and composition. The things that we grew up with aren't necessarily all the realities today that our kids face. So there's some great publications out there to look at. The Partnership for Strong Communities, which is a Connecticut-based organization that's quite a lot of advocacy for housing-related issues in the state, has a page with frequently asked questions. And again, these types of questions in terms of taxes and why is it good for our town, etc., may answer some questions that you may have. This is just a sample of what they have. Some people are concerned about density and say, well, the project's just too dense. Affordable housing is too dense. And the issue when we talk about the affordable housing community is density is just a number. It's a way of measuring something in terms of units per acre. But actually, it's really the design which is more important than just the number. I tried to find a good paired image for tonight's presentation that had the same density in different designs. And unfortunately, what I was able to find was examples such as these, which are aerial images. They don't really sort of anticipate what people see from the ground. But the issue is, in a sense, you could see developments of similar density, and you would visually prefer one over the other. And it really is an issue of the importance of design, and not to focus quite so much on density. And density can be appropriate in some places. For example, in the town center, the denser than Ridgefield. There's good reasons for that. Property values. People are concerned that lower cost housing can have an impact on the neighborhood. Truly is a, perhaps you've heard of the National Real Estate app, I guess we'll call it, or software program, did an investigation in the nation's 20 least affordable housing markets. Low-income housing built during a 10-year span showed no effect on their buying values. So they tracked this in 20 metro areas with their database, and this is what they discovered. So I think there are examples from Trulia, for example, that they titled their study, there doesn't go to the neighborhood. People sometimes are also concerned about school enrollments. And school enrollments are an interesting situation. Nationally, this information from the National Association of Home Builders. Single-family detached houses have the highest school enrollment impact per unit. It's about 60 students per 100, whereas multifamily, the impact is less than half of that. Also, the Ridgefield enrollments have been increasing. The 2021 system-wide enrollment was 0.5 pupils per housing within the community. So we're even lower than what the national average is for single-family houses, because again, our age demographics, etc. overall. So again, strategies which are being considered include continuing to implement the POCD, look at ways to increase assisted housing, look at ways to increase need-restricted housing, look at ways to increase overall housing diversity, and pay attention to design. So those are the directions that the committee has been thinking about going. We look forward to your comments, questions, and other information here tonight. So I'm going to be scripting as we go here. All I would ask is put your hand up if I can recognize you. Try to catch up with my notes. Exactly. And stand up, right? Because that opens up your diagram, then people are going to hear you much better. And then hopefully I won't have to run around with the microphone. So I think the gentleman right there.
I'm sorry, I don't know the minutes or give my son from school. But I'm just curious if you could put a number up that, so I'm sorry, Sean Connolly, our board of selectmen here. Put a number out that our affordable housing about 3% as far as the 10%. Do you know how that's changed over time? Are you saying you've been working on this, we've been talking about it for a long time? Just curious how that number has moved up and stable over time.
It has fluctuated and changed over time. So the public, the E30G was first adopted, the affordability period was 20 years. And then it got changed, and the affordability percentage also changed. So Ridgefield did have the creation of some units that have since retired, and so that fluctuates over time. The number of units which are CHFA mortgage and rental assistance also fluctuate over time. But generally speaking, the units which are assisted housing, like the housing authority, these are financed long-term, those tend to stay steady. So there are fluctuations. We actually talked about the concept maybe of mapping this out so that people can see that, you know, if we take our eye off the ball, we're probably going to lag behind or lose some units. So that's a great question. Yes, it does change over time.
So a follow-on question. I'm Rick Tobin, I'm the Ridgefield Affordable Housing Committee. I know that naturally occurring affordable housing does not count for purposes of 3G, but if you added those units in, where would we be? That's part one. Part two is, if we adopt a plan, would there be some vision for advocacy to sort of amend 3G to include such types of housing?
Great question. So the concept of naturally occurring affordable housing, the state only counts housing if it is restricted in some way, shape, or form. So those four categories I mentioned are considered restricted. One, because it's financed by state or federal funds, and the mortgage requirements tie into affordable. The second is deed restricted, and that has a restriction on the land records which requires that units be sold or rented at affordable prices for 40 years. That's a deed restriction on the land record, so that counts. The next category is what's called CHFA mortgage. These are income qualifying households that get a mortgage and involvements on the land records, and so it counts under the state's calculus as an affordable unit for that purpose. And then the fourth category is rental assistance. These are lower income households where the state makes up the difference between what they can pay and what the unit rents for. Because of the rental rates in Ridgefield, we only have 7 of those units, right? That people can get more house in another community, so they go there. So we don't get that if somebody goes somewhere else. And then the CHFA, again, it's $650,000 for median house, and they're really challenging to qualify for those. So a naturally occurring affordable housing unit is one that sells or rents at an affordable price, but because it's not deed restriction, it doesn't count. I've been an advocate over the years that we should try to figure out ways to get those to be counted. And if the market goes ballistic, the units are no longer affordable, then our percentage drops. But they are affordable, so why do we let them recount? So I think advocacy is something that could be considered for that as part of our effort. But that has been attempted multiple times over the past 30 years. It hasn't happened. So I'm going to come back to you. I just feel like I'm figuring this out of the room because you guys are closer, so I see you. So I'm going to start over here and then come back. Yes.
Question, please, about the process. So this is working backwards. The plan is due by June 1st next year to the state. If I recall from your very first slide up there, timeline, mention of May of next year, a vote. Can you explain, please, again, what is going to be voted on, who is going to vote on it, what are the consequences of that vote, and if the vote in fact turns down the plan, what are the consequences of not giving it to the state June 1st next year? My point is that cutting it too tight? If your plan is voted down, if that's going to be what's going to be voted on in May, is this going to be a choice to the voters once again in this town of vote yes or face doom?
I think it's unlikely the plan will be voted down because we're not going to simply present it at the end for approval. It's an inclusive process. The Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning will be apprised and have input on what's going on along this preliminary session, preliminary presentation. We will receive input, so when there is the final meeting, there will be something that is a very strong sense that unless there's a surprise, we will approve.
So it's a public meeting,
Yes. Well,
and whoever attends, town voter is going to be the person voting.
well, maybe Bob can help answer that. This is the Board of Selectmen have to vote on it. I suppose they can determine the process by which they vote on it. And planning and zoning also. Bob, would you want to answer that?
Well, yeah, the Board of Selectmen will vote on it, but what we're not talking about here are the mandates that are coming down from the state. And we don't have any control over those mandates. So if they say, our representatives and city senators say, this is what we're going to do, here are the mandates. It's just like very clear to G, spoke about that. And, you put it in a great light, but we're only at, 4%, and we're never going to get 10%. This is never going to happen. But that's a mandate. And as long as we have that mandate, we're going to be under as long as we don't get that 10%, we're going to be subjected to the G mandates and everything else that our code says. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that Board of Selectmen and planning and zoning can vote on, but this is one of them.
I think just a couple things. I think the process, as Dave indicated, is meant to be very inclusive. So we're pulling a schedule right now for the draft plan to be ready in January, which would leave the entire springtime for public input and comment, because tonight is the beginning of the dialogue, not the end. I think as the gentleman just indicated, member of the Board of Selectmen, we are dealing also with shifting sands here. In this past legislative session, the legislature adopted some fundamental changes to state zoning enabling acts and other things, which also affect all of this. And so we're trying to do the best job we can for the town in this scenario. And there could be additional mandates that they come in.
And will your meeting tomorrow night be recorded and available on the town website?
Yes.
So how many more units do we need to get to our 10%?
I think it's the gentleman indicated. I think 10% should not be our ultimate goal, if you will. We're almost over 9,000 units in Ridgefield today. We're close to 9,500. So that's 950 units, and we're at 257 today. So the challenge we have is that for us to add units, that's a lot of units. Right? That's more units than we've added in a decade or 20 years. So I think the goal should be for us to be cognizant of a clear view, how it could affect us, but work incrementally and purposely to try to diversify housing choices in ways that work for Ridgefield. I think we should try to make the units that are deed-restricted, perhaps in perpetuity, instead of this or look at other things. So I think if we obsess on the numbers, we're going to feel like we're failing and we're not doing it, we're not getting it. And if we focus on addressing housing needs, we could make measurable progress. So I'm going to try to take one here back and forth. They just, otherwise, I sort of go to the That's
Hi, Chief Murray McLean. So, if we say that we are never going to obtain 10%, then we're shooting in the dark. At this rate, if builders only have to put in 10-20% affordable housing, they are continually increasing the base, of which we have to reach 10%. So that by nature is a fallacy. So, but to say that we cannot get 950 units, when we're talking about a 150 unit building, so then people keep making it seem like we don't want affordable housing for people who make under $100,000 a year, but that's not true. What we're concerned about is the density, okay? And I have yet to hear you answer what you're doing about the traffic. because no matter what the mandate, there is gridlock. We can't even get a don't block the box. So at any time, and you all know this, there is no room for any more cars. So aside from the fact that you're saying we should just accept the mandates, not okay, aim for 950, what does it take? And put the units in multi-family zones and don't block them in the middle of the 2-acre zone neighborhood where they don't belong. Put them in town. I'm trying to be respectful, but I asked you guys on Facebook. The town is in cancer. I've been here for 35 years. And this is a disgrace. Yes, we need affordable housing. Yeah. We need these buildings. They're beautiful the way you paint them. But they don't look like that. And they don't bring, we don't have a problem with people. I don't make a lot of money. Like I could go in one of those units. This is not about low-income housing. But we need answers and not being told that we are not going to reach their 10%. Because what you're saying is that we have to do what the government says. They can do 830G till ad nauseum. Come up with a plan. You've been on this for 25 years. I've been watching it. So where are we and why is nothing changed? I'm sorry. He asked about 3%. And he said, what have we done in these past years? Why is that 3% not much?
So I think we're going to go back and we're actually going to document, if you will, the progress that has been made and then perhaps lost over time due to retirement. If it's the community will, let's go for 950, we'll go for 950.
Go for it. Then we reach it and then there's no more discussion.
Got it. Aim for 950.
Glenn, if I might, so if you do the math, you end up that we are, as of today, 655 units short. And it's pretty ridiculous to think that we're going to build 655 units here within the next couple of years. It's not going to happen. 655 affordable units. A couple of things. They don't have to be done under 8-30G. There's an exception that all development has to be 30%. No, we can build 100% and that would change the equation quite a bit. We can also, turn this back to you, so smile. We can also,
Well, I was really concerned about traffic, like capacity.
oh, right.
We're so
Right? You only need a certain number of what Glenn explained are housing equivalency units to get you to the next moratorium. And that requires adding a certain number of housing equivalent points. We are along the way to our next moratorium. If, for example, this Prospect Ridge project were to be developed, it would get us, depending how many units are built, most or all of the way to that moratorium. Now, the last time we had a moratorium, we just said, hey, we got a moratorium, we don't have to sweat about it. And 4 years later, when the moratorium expired, there was a backlog of projects, and all of a sudden people saw these projects blooming all over the place and saying they're being overrun. Part of that is because we did not tackle the problem during the moratorium. But if we could go from moratorium to approach moratorium, maybe we can get to that 10% in a slow, smart plan.
Right. But I believe somebody had asked, I thought it might be wrong, but we had asked if that 150 unit building would apply to affordable housing, and I was informed somebody said it would not apply.
I don't understand that.
Okay, so
It would apply 100%.
So 150 units, whatever it is.
I personally like that. It's not going to be 150 units. That number, and I hear people say that all the time, that number was based on if we used the maximum of the property to full capacity. It's not going to be used that. Well, it's going to happen tomorrow.
Let's just try to be equitable here. So I'm going here, over there, then we're next. You got two people. So I got the next four speakers. Go, sir.
I'll go back to the process question.
Stand up.
I'm sorry. I have to go back to the process question. Is it going to be the board's like approving or a town meeting? Because if it's a town meeting, I think you're running a real risk very opinionated people that will vote it down. Then what happens? I mean, that's again, relying on the main town meeting gets scary.
Yeah, I love the way down on that. First of all, any time the town buys, sells, or leases property, it has to go to the town for a vote. It has to go to the town for a vote. Townspeople, if they have a town meeting, and the townspeople will vote on it. For example, a couple of weeks ago, at the Board of Selectmen meeting, there was a transfer of property from to the Conservation Commission. People come in and they actually vote on that. We signed a lease at town-owned properties. The residents come in and they have to vote on it. So the particular property that people are concerned about right now is 150 units. They don't think you have control of that property, correct? They have prospectors,
No.
so you don't have control of that property. So that if we were to sell that property to a developer or lease it or give it away, the town's going to have to vote.
But this isn't the plan, not selling the property. Because again, I appreciate if you're doing something in a town votes, no, hey, stop. But now we're going to make a vote with a June deadline. So that's
Yes,
I'm worried about the main vote, not the town.
yeah, this is the plan of conservation that in development that he's talking about.
Well,
There's a separate issue, which is the proposal that he put forward, that the Affordable Housing Committee put forward on a 150 unit affordable.
Now, this is the main plan that plan has to go to the
Board of Selectmen.
yes.
And I don't know if it's required approval from planning and zoning, but we'll certainly seek approval.
But it's not happening.
That's not the time, but the Board of Selectmen need to approve it. How they choose to approve it is up to them. I don't know if the town meeting is required or a referendum is required. But Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, you can decide to make it a vote or make it a public vote or simply do it as a Board of Selectmen vote.
What kind of plan conservation?
No, on the affordable housing plan.
On affordable housing plan? I would submit that that's a go to the public.
That's tough to go, because again, now, 150 people show up at these meetings, and it can go down pretty quickly, and then we're not going to be fun.
There's a requirement in statute for the affordable housing plan to have a public hearing, wherever the adopting entity is. So some towns are doing board of selectmen, some towns are doing planning and zoning. I've not heard anybody doing town meeting. Some towns have town councils, they're doing town council. So I do think that this is up to Ridgefield to figure out how it wants to approach it. And I think the plan will be ready in January, and we'll figure that out with the council. So I think yes, there you go. Thank you.
I want to go back to what the lady said. When you have a plan, you're going to have a 5-year plan. What are the tangibles that you think, what are the deliverables in those 5 years that you're going to propose? Because if we need 950 and we cannot build them in 950, does your 5-year plan propose to build them over 10 years? 5 years, 2 years? So what are the tangible of that plan apart from continue to implement, to look at ways to increase? Will you be asked to have something more concrete than?
I think the Affordable Housing Committee, based on the conversations I've had with them so far, is to move in that direction to be as specific as possible. So there could be recommendations to other boards for regulation changes. There could be recommendations to other boards to acquire property or to promote certain types of things. So the tangible, I think, will be specific recommendations. Because the 5-year outlook, from what I've seen around the state, is to promote action. And that, within, let's say, 4 years or 5 years from now, we'll be into the update of that plan in terms of what are our next steps. So how do we make progress on that setup?
So,
Can I answer your question?
yes, but I'm not sure I like the answer because you're telling me we will have a plan, but we will not be held accountable to whatever we decided to do? If it's we
It's hard to
propose,
answer that
do
question.
you know what I'm saying?
I think so.
That's from the state perspective, if it's a requirement, so,
So we're in the early stages here. At the same time, the state adopted this public act, this most recent legislation. There is a section in that act which created a commission, a state commission or committee on Connecticut's future, something like that. And part of their charge is to evaluate what ways for communities to implement those affordable housing plans. Now, does that mean that they're going to be monitoring what the communities do? I don't know yet. This is still up in the air. So I think, as we've talked about here, the first step is what does Ridgefield feel it can and should do? And we'll get started on that, and we'll see what unfolds as time goes on.
thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, this guy right back here. Yeah, go ahead.
Next, thank you. I want to thank you for a really good presentation at the beginning of this meeting. It was very informative. My question is the parcel with 150 unit apartment buildings supposed to go, is that open space currently? I'm hearing online that it is. Is that designated open space, and are we going to change the zoning for that parcel to be residential?
We'll talk more about that parcel tomorrow, as I understand the parcel.
That brings up my second point, which is we can't get information, accurate information about what the agenda is, when the meetings are happening, and who's in attendance. So is there one place, centralized place, where we can get, because I came here tonight to talk about 150 unit okay, and then all of a sudden the agenda's changed to something else. That meeting is tomorrow, which, by the way, I'm signed up for. So where's the best place to get information about what's going on, so that there's no bait and switch, which I feel is what's happening tonight. There's no bait and switch in the future. I just want it really clear, so everybody in this room can have a chance to understand what the issues are, vote on the issues, make their issues known, because there's a lot of, in my opinion, sneaky stuff here.
You should be able to answer the open space or not.
Yeah, so what about that?
It's, the property is currently under the control of the Parks and Rec department. So it will require approval from the state in order to do this. I don't know if the acreage that we're talking about is considered open space. It's not designated open space the way that some properties have to be. But we're looking at a small portion of that property, so we've got to the whole thing. To answer your question, all meetings are noticed, and when they're noticed, there's an agenda. If there's no notice, it's because it's not a meeting. If there's no agenda, it's because it's not required. You will find everything at the county clerk's office. You also find much of it on the Facebook page. You can always find our minutes. And our meetings are public, and we're shooting for tonight's session was entitled Public Information Input Session on the Affordable Housing Plan, which sounds very clear. I'm sorry if somehow it was misrepresented or there was no information.
The gentleman, that's sorry.
So my concern is clear. This gentleman here, the Jeff front, and then the lady in front. I'll get some.
Could you hold the mic close, please? Can't hear you.
So as far as this plan is concerned, obviously I know, just from what I read online and hearing comments here tonight, that people are concerned about the 830G statute. And I know a lot of people in this room and a lot of people online, myself included, kind of feel that that is taken advantage of in a lot of ways. And we're looking, I think people are concerned and are looking for some guidance or a way that we can, it's never going to stop, obviously, especially if we're nowhere near that affordable housing number, but is part of this plan, is there anything in this plan to sort of counteract 830G or respond to it? Because like people are saying, we're never going to hit these numbers, or it may be impossible or highly unlikely. I mean, is there something we could do? You guys mentioned that there was that moratorium where we could do a certain amount of work to get, I guess, a certain number of points, or something that kind of allows us more time. I mean, is there anything in this plan that will focus on that aspect of it, where we can say, hey, look, we can go to the state, for example, and say, hey, look, we're doing X, Y, and Z. We're going to oppose this 830G application, because I know trying to oppose them or stop them or reject them, I guess would probably be the more appropriate word, is problematic for a town, because they're challenging. They end up kind of failing, I guess, when the town rejects them, they go to the next level, and the town has to get to know the rule. Is there anything we can do as a town in this plan where we can point to it and say, hey, look, we're doing X, Y, and Z. We're going to deny this 830G application because of the work we're doing. And like, is that going to select the stand on? Is that possible?
I address the town, but how is that usually handled statewide? What is the state's response to those efforts by towns?
So the Public Act was adopted back in 1989. Over the past 30 years, there have been multiple attempts by municipalities in the state to get the law modified. There have been a couple of tweaks over the years, but generally speaking, the law has stayed intact. So the situation is that the developer gets a developer submitting a compliant application. That means that 30% of the units are deed restricted for at least 40 years. Half of those units, 15% are deed restricted at 80% annual, 50% at 60% annual. If the commission turns it down, it goes to court. The court makes the decision. There's at least one situation in Ridgefield where the court approved the development. So the only rationale for the town to be able to deny and have it stick in its head is that it's a substantial threat to public health or safety that cannot be overcome. I think there's quite a bit of history on the Eureka site, the application there in terms of the Saugatuck River watershed and the impacts on that. And so that was a significant issue there. So it's hard to talk decisively because it's moving ground. But I think that I have tried to write down your comments here in terms of what can we do about 830G. I do want you to know that, as Dave indicated, it could take us a long time to get to 950 minutes if we're at 257 today, whatever the number is. Okay, so that's quite a bit of minutes. But we can also get there by getting a moratorium, which requires we get accumulate what are called, it's 2% of your housing stock. So this is a rough number, okay, I don't hold me to it. But let's say it's 180 points. There are some units, for example, if the elderly unit will make it half a point. But if it's a unit at 60% of AMI, you can get 2.5 points per unit. So the different levels that we can actually look at, figure out how many points we already have, and in that 4-year period, how do we get 180 points? Because that's 45 points per year. That could be 20 units of the right mix. And do something like that. So there can be ways to get there. And that's something I recommend we sort of talk about that. So hang on a second.
I just want to add on to that. We hear a lot about 8-32. I have to remind people sometimes that we are not the 8-32 committee. But what we do believe, and I think almost everybody here will agree with this, if there's going to be affordable housing in Ridgefield, we want to do it our way rather than have it imposed on us. Now, some of those, now, some of those might be really nice 8-32 developments the town agrees on and they're beautiful. Some of those might be public housing that we build. Some of those might be changes to the regulation. Some of those might be strategies like adaptive reuse, like take the building next, pulling down a warehouse next to Casey, or just go on to Ridgefield Supply. And look at that. So there are a lot of creative solutions we can bring to it, including things like housing trust funds. We can raise money that can help give people incentives to restrict their existing properties, so we're not necessarily having to build from scratch every 8-30G, every deed-restricted property. But
We have to work together. We have to come up with really solid ideas, and then we have to have the guts to implement them as a committee and not cry because it's too close to the dog park.
What, wait, that traffic,
I'm sorry, my fault. Let's go to the next. Okay, Dan.
My voice is a little lost. I'm just curious, obviously, having an open process is what everyone wants. This is a long-term need, so we should be looking at this with long-term views, right? But yet, all I've heard is this one parcel in Prospect Ridge. Are we not talking about 3 or 4 options? Are we simply going forward the whole process, only looking at Prospect Ridge? And if that either passes or fails, we haven't had any discussion about anything else. It seems to me, if we have a long-term need that we're trying to address, then we should be bringing in some of those other blue areas that you had on there. And why are they not part of what we've heard so far? Because all I'm hearing are this one parcel of land that we're talking about. But yet it seems like the long-term strategy should encompass a much larger part of the community. In that area of the community, we already have, there's some elderly facilities, there's some disabled facilities, there's obviously traffic issues, it's a narrow street, et cetera, et cetera. If we're trying to create some density area, it seems like that would be something that could be a little challenging. No one wants that to be called Potter's Hill later on. So maybe we should have a more open thing. So let me ask, first of all, are there other things on the table to discuss outside of Prospect Ridge? If not, how the hell do we get pigeonholed into this one thing now with 4 or 5 months left to make a decision? And is that simply the horse that we're riding to the end of this? Or is there going to be some more consideration for the other areas?
So that's a great question. There is some confusion, and that's a kind of timing. It takes 4, sometimes 5 years or more to go from the planning or initial conception stage for affordable housing development to finish. So if we wanted to wait until the end of the planning process to look at Prospect Ridge, we'd be losing a couple of years. So the Prospect Ridge project is completely separate from the plan. The plan is wide-ranging. As you said, it's looking at all solutions. It's looking at all the areas of town. They're 2 separate things, and while they're related, they should not be confused with one another.
I don't understand that. Why is the dialogue all about Prospect Ridge? Why is there nothing about Branchville? Why is there nothing about other areas? It seems like we're single threaded.
Sure.
So are we single threaded?
No. We're just getting ready with the planning process. We're just getting started with this planning process. Right
So in this planning process, we're going to hear other properties brought.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
So Prospect Ridge is one of many that we'll be discussing. Somehow we got focused on Prospect Ridge, and that was a mistake because it sounds like there's a much larger discussion that's going to happen between now and May or June of next year.
You're absolutely right.
I think it's it was stated earlier, the main purpose of tonight's meeting is the bigger picture, plan preparation, what should our strategy be? Prospect Ridge is one element which is off to the side being investigated. It's not central to this plan just yet, right?
Well, are there similar ones now also off to the side?
Not that I'm aware of.
So we're single threaded then outside the process.
I mean, the plan strategies can be focused on how we're going to get to the results, and whether it's on Buttercup Lane or Main Street or some other street in town, is something that we're going to get to later. Because I think the question is, I think I've heard loud and clear, how are we going to get the results here, whether it's a moratorium or an extension?
So it seems like tomorrow, there's a meeting tomorrow that's specifically about Prospect Ridge.
No, it's not.
What is it?
It's an affordable housing meeting. Prospect Ridge is one of the agenda, one of several agenda items.
Is there more properties to be discussed outside of Prospect Ridge?
Absolutely. For example, all of Branchville is an important area.
And that's one of the things to be discussed.
Well, that's so the planning process
Is Prospect Ridge the only thing?
Absolutely not.
Well, what are the agenda items for the branch though?
Well, that will come up in the planning process, which is going to take place over the next 2 months or so. So, branch will be discussed, other properties in town will be discussed, other strategies in town will be discussed. That's a very separate thing from the Prospect Ridge project, which is on its own track.
But there's nothing else on its own track.
Well, not yet, but for example, we're talking about branch.
Well, how did Prospect Ridge get on its own track? Why is that being in cross areas? What got us to this point?
This was an opportunity for us to get started with affordable housing that we know we're going to need.
It just happened to be the first one.
Yes.
Yeah, well, okay, if that's what you're telling me, I believe you. I don't know, I'm asking a question.
Well, maybe that's it.
Here's the list I got.
I want to kind of circle back to ways of increasing housing diversity. We have a pretty diverse market as it is in this town. When we bought our house here 15 years ago, that was one of the reasons, because it wasn't just big houses, it wasn't just condos, we had great diversity. You commented on the state-approved affordable housing was what, 279 or state acknowledged. How many houses do we have that are not being acknowledged by the state, but are actually affordable? Somebody had asked that question earlier. So how many units do we have that would be considered price affordable? Because I think that will say a lot. If we can go and say, hey, we have another 200 units that meet this criteria. They're not deed restricted. They're not built after 1989, because that's another criteria which is ridiculous. So how many of those units do we have?
So we did, this is a challenging question to answer specifically. I'm just going to give you a quick summary as to why.
But let me ask you,
So I apologize for that. The best census data we have available right now, unfortunately, is from 2010.
but nobody did this study, and it was just an option. All right, looking for numbers.
For 2010, and that's 10 years old. The 2020 census has been delayed. There's some sense that it may have gotten messed up a little bit, so we have preliminary data, and so we don't have anything else. The only other thing that's out there that's available is what's called the American Community Survey. Has anybody here participated ever in the American Community Survey?
I got it like a year or two ago.
Yeah. So what you did too? Wow, that's actually pretty good. Because what they do is they sample a small sample of the population each year and then estimate for everybody based on what you said. And so it's not barely adding up the margin for error described by. We did a preliminary analysis based on the ACS data in terms of the number of units at different rents and sale prices. And we estimated that in terms of NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing, when that term first came up, we're somewhere near 10%. Right? But it doesn't count.
So what should happen if we don't do anything? So we're near 10%. We know in our town we have a pretty diverse housing supply. And I'm not saying don't build it, but why this push? What are they going to do to us if we're not building?
That is for representatives to decide.
No, but that's
Right,
the right way to look at it.
We're not going to get involved into, yelling at whatever.
But I was just curious, because I know we have a pretty diverse
Can
market.
I ask a question?
There is diversity in housing prices, even in the non-affordable housing prices. There, houses go from $650,000 up to several $1 million. So
But there's several that start to.
I understand. So the issue is there's not really enough housing to meet all of the needs in the community. And so how can or should we address that? I think that's what we're struggling with.
How do we determine the needs? Who determines which are more important than others?
So 31% of the housing that's in town already are housing cost burden. At least 22% of the households in town today are in the Alice categories. These are people who live in the community. Never mind other people who may want to live in Ridgefield, the people who are here today, that exceed the 10%. So we're already at a shortage right now.
So what if you fix that? I mean, right now, we're getting ready for a reassessment. They're coming in and they're reevaluating our houses and everybody's values are going to go up, which means their taxes are going to go up. So that 31% is now maybe going to become 40%. So they keep giving us with these reevaluations and saying we have needs that we have to address. So it doesn't really pan out, you know? And I don't know, maybe let's deal with the root causes of the problems rather than just creating more problems. So anyway, I just wanted to do a little more on that.
Jack Welch, just want to address a comment you made about open land. So Prospect Ridge is number 41, open land is 36 acres total, and there's actually a trail that goes through there. You're looking at 15 acres, which actually cuts that trail right in half. So it is open space right now. It includes the ball field and everything else. That's open space, but that is open space area right now. It is needed. It's needed that way, but it's needed that way now. And they talked about different things at different times in that for that property that we successfully fought. So hopefully that happen. But so the meeting tomorrow night, what's the point for that? Is that a public forum? Or is that a
It's
meeting?
not a public forum, it's a meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee. You can sign up, go to the town website, find it on the calendar, and register to attend. It's a webinar. There will be time for public comment at the end. We're only giving 2 hours for the use of the webinar. The town's webinar.
So when will be the first public forum for the project?
I don't know. We're still, all right. Where we are with Prospect Ridge right now, we're just determining the feasibility of building on the property. If we determine, it's determined by the engineers that it is feasible to build on that property, then the question is, what will be the impact of building on the property? So then we're doing a feasibility study, which will look at traffic, which will look at the market, which will look at the financial impact, which will look at schools, which will look at community services and infrastructure. Once we have information, then it's time to have a public discussion, because to have a discussion about information, that's like Facebook.
We're going to do all that by June.
No, we haven't done that. It's a second time.
Oh, there's no deadline, won't be part of the plan.
We'll probably be part of the plan at some point to say that's a property that should be considered, but depending on where we are, we'll see.
Can you please address the traffic that I asked earlier?
What did they answer?
What I said is that the town is currently impassable with the current population. What are you going to do as you build more units to accommodate that?
Okay, I got that comment. Earlier, we also want to ask a question, so we'll come back.
But I asked it 20 minutes ago.
You can answer the question about traffic tonight, but it broke down traffic, so we're going to be considering traffic as part of our.
We don't have any particular plans right now yet for how you're going to anticipate how they'll be addressed.
No traffic solution, no matter what happens. Housing will get built, branch and line, the train station, and traffic will be less of an issue. Housing will be built in the town center, people would walk to places. So that's, if Prospect Ridge is, if we're doing a master plan, Prospect Ridge is an issue, traffic would follow after that. So I've written it down, it's something we need to think about. We don't have answers to that specific. So there's several things up over here, so yes, ma'am? Yep, right there.
Susan Constantine, on planning and zoning. Glenn helped us with the POCD. I sort of got elected halfway through that. It was really helpful with that. Would it be safe to say that what you're doing tonight would compare to how we were doing the POCD and this is affordable housing? Because that has to be done every 10 years and you have to report it to the state. Because I think that there's a little bit of confusion about what's going on tonight. And if that's so, is that you're just collecting information, so we're all giving our suggestions now so they can be considered? Is it the same way we did our POCD?
Yes, we did the POC process. At that time, we did a townwide telephone survey. That's sort of where we got collecting.
But people were also able to come in and make suggestions. So I think that from what I'm seeing, and I don't know, because I also was, thought I was coming to hear about Prospect Ridge thing. So I was confused as well. But if that's what's going on, if everyone here just gives their suggestions, that's why Glenn is writing it down, and he did such an amazing job with us, with POC, that if you give all your things, that those things are going to be discussed. Is that what you're trying to say, Dave? That you're going to discuss all these things, and that's why there isn't an answer for everything tonight. Does that help? Does that help?
And one thing to add to that, the plan of conservation and development can be amended, right, that's in the state statutes. And we hope that once the affordable housing plan is done, significant parts of that can be incorporated into the plan of development, which is not a little bit, well, necessarily vague when it comes to housing, to be more specific.
And we are working on that. I'm on the subcommittee for that. So we have a subcommittee of the planning and zoning that we are addressing items on that POC. And that's open, and then everyone can watch that as well when that happens. So just also just know that those of us that are debating on planning and zoning, we already are very aware of the statutory change, and we're all very thinking things we can do, and we hear all of you. And we're trying to look for some other ways to move about it that may not be just building, but there are other ways that we are thinking that are. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Bill.
I just want to see if there's something we can do to change the rules for development. Even though we have this 8G, you said there's a 40-year moratorium that the low-income pricing expires in 40 years. Can we change that ourselves and just say it is forever, or it is 60 years, or is there anything we can do to make it a little less attractive? Because clearly it's very attractive.
I think the economics of Ridgefield for the market rate units make the affordable units an acceptable component of the project. I have to let you know that I think Ridgefield is part of a leader around the state. The town has already adopted a model of standard housing affordability plan that requires that all developers use the same framework, if you will, for their deed restrictions. Came across working on the POCD and discovered that every affordable housing development that ever been approved in town, everybody had a different plan. And you can imagine what it could have been like trying to administer and monitor and manage. So the town now has a standard plan. We have a list of approved third-party administrators. It doesn't have to be third-party. Approved administrators with affordability plan to qualify households and sale prices. So Ridgefield is getting procedures in place to manage affordable housing well. The question about the restriction period is a fertile area of discussion around the state records. The state statutes say at least 40 years. And towns around the state are saying, well, hang on a second here. If every time, what's that Greek mythology, Sisyphus or something? Trying to roll a ball uphill. So you make progress, right? We got 950 units. We're awesome. And then the next day, 100 of them retire. Dang, we have to do 100 units now. So can we figure out a way to try to get good quality, affordable housing in town that meet needs over the long term? And there are communities around the state that have adopted deed restrictions for the life of the unit or 40 years, whichever is longer. There's towns around the state that are looking at the situation of what happens when the deed restrictions expire. Because if I was to sell to you an affordable unit, 40 years is taken by, come year 40, his unit resets the market. Who gets the money? He does. We would all want that kind of price appreciation. So the question is, well, can the town capture part of that increment so that we can actually invest that money in another affordable unit? Why does somebody, and so we're learning as we go along. So I think that these are things that we're talking about as part of the affordable housing plan. The coaching program in place, as this gentleman indicated, multiple facets to it that all kind of work together to improve the situation. And then 5 years from now, we can improve on that. And so I think that's our problem.
Yes. This is really complicated subject that we're all trying to wrap our brains around. And we're conflating a lot of different issues here. POCD, Affordable Housing Commission, 830G. This is really confusing for people that don't do this as a living. Yeah, I think everybody's done a great job tonight, but a lot of this has been number salad and word salad. Okay? I'm a simple person. I like simple concepts and simple ways to understand these things. And just to give you one of the things I think is very confusing is we talk about affordable housing. Well, what is affordable housing? What's affordable for you can be very different than what's affordable for you. I want to stay here. Okay, I've been here 40 years. But what's causing Ridgefield and all the other towns around us to become unaffordable? It's because of supply and demand, the limitation on land that we have. I lived in Illinois, Illinois before I moved here. It was 25,000 people. It was on the far western suburbs of Chicago. There were hundreds of thousands of acres, and they developed, it's now about 175, 200,000 acres. We don't have that. So it's supply and demand, and then it's the cost of doing business in this town. Okay, so when we talk about affordable housing, like I look at assisted housing. And when I think of assisted housing, I think of assisted living. Okay, we have a new designation. I have to use you, but it's, we're using a word in there. Look at ways to increase financially assisted housing. That's what you're talking about, financially assisted housing. So my concern is, and Dave, you know this, when my very first year on the board of selectmen, Steve's here, we were both advocates of reconstituting the housing committee. And I said to you at that time, I'd like to see a study of all the housing, and then let's determine the type of housing. But I think there's a lot of skepticism now because we have an agenda being pushed out of the federal government and then out of the state government, and with all this financially assisted housing being built and pushed into these communities. So, why can't, and these are mandates, and that was the point that I tried to make earlier. We're just assuming and we have to accept these mandates, and we do, they're mandates, we have to accept them. But the problem is, we want to, as people that invested in Ridgefield, we want the best for our community. Why can't we make our decisions on the type of housing that we need, the type of housing that we want? When I moved here, I started looking at houses in the area. I couldn't afford it. And I ended up, thank goodness, I love it now, I ended up in Ridgefield. But just because I want to live in Darien, or I want to live in Greenwich on a Long Island Sound, I can't. Okay, so, but we need to have control and not have an outside advocacy group demanding that we build financially assisted housing, because who's going to pay for that? Okay, we have to pay for it as the taxpayer. Hartford does not generate income. They take our tax money and then they figure out ways, and they're telling us how to spend it. And, it's time to, call it what it is, and let's start looking at housing that's affordable and needed and wanted in our community, and not housing that the mayor of New Haven or Hartford that really want to push down
I want to first apologize for any naivete on my part because half the time But a couple things. We are faced with what is coming from the state, what they said we have to have. I don't particularly like that, but I think sometimes communities are enriched by things that people might avoid initially, and that's not always a bad thing. But when it comes to this process that I've been seeing here tonight, difficulty in getting kind of simple answers to questions, getting wrong answers to questions, it makes me kind of question the process. And so when I think of what I've gotten here tonight, and I may be wrong, what I've gotten here tonight is we're going to talk about this thing, but we're not going to talk about this thing, right? And the other thing is that the Prospect Ridge thing. Now, if we're talking about creating a plan for affordable housing or a plan to help with this issue that we have, that was not ours made, it was given to us by the state, but it's a reality that we have, that rather than taking this opportunity of something that could be possibly 150 units toward the number that we have to make, we're thinking things more holistically. How could we bring other parts of the Ridgefield community together to study this issue and find other creative ways, holistically, not to put this project here and then forget about it, and then try to find another project here, and then that goes some way, thinking of all the projects that can happen, or all the places, or all the ways that can be addressed, and that's why I don't hear here. I mean, I'm hearing about we're putting together a plan, but I don't personally really understand what that plan is.
Yeah, that's a fair question. Because no, we haven't really talked about what must be included in the plan itself. You want to run down what will be in the plan?
Well, I think any good plan is going to be the sort of statement of the issue that we're kind of grappling with. It's going to look at the available data, community input. We're talking about the survey. Your question about involving the community and other strategies is maybe a question that we might ask. And then put them together in terms of an organized strategic approach. I think as this gentleman indicated right here, you want to have several pages back, have your big picture vision and then have your strategies underneath that. And they could be things such as regulation changes that aren't that exciting, but can actually over time make a big impact. They could be project related. I think developers, there may be ways to encourage or incent the creation of affordable housing, but not at the 30% level. Developers go to the 30% affordable because they have to get there because it's not otherwise approvable. Maybe we could craft a regulation, and I think the commission has talked about this multiple times over the years. What could we do? And some regulations haven't worked out the way they were intended. So I think the plan is likely to be organized in the basic explanatory approach to get to the strategies in terms of what will happen. So that's not a specific outline here.
But specifically, it'll have the data and analytics to look at the existing housing stock. It'll determine what the need is in town, and it'll look for different ways over time to address that need. It's not focused exclusively on 8-30G. It is looking more broadly at housing. For example, there are a lot of people, $100,000 plus, who are housing cost burden. For some of them, it's not an issue. For some of them it is. So we're at the beginning of this process. We have a lot of data to gather. Once we have all of that, we'll lay out strategies and specific tactics about how we work with it. And Glenn gave some examples. Maybe there are some regulation changes. The town should just recently change the rules for accessory dwelling units, accessory apartments. It's good. It's really good what they did. That's something that hadn't been done. We would recommend. The plan is going to be broad analysis and prescriptive analysis of the affordable housing need in Ridgefield, more broadly, all housing need in Ridgefield, and then to offer a prescription for meeting that. Does that answer your question?
So, the gentleman who's here mentioned that is the same. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll talk to you after. I'm sorry, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
have very low inventory, Bob. I also know that we do need affordable housing, but I respectfully request that we have an open forum like this for that 155 aspect, because there are a lot of questions that are not being answered, and when you have back and forth, you have a lot more knowledge. Instead of having a webinar where we're
No, I promise we will have it. Tomorrow's meeting is not a webinar about that. It's a regular affordable housing meeting.
Can I ask you when you're going to put that out? Because I think people want to know.
For what?
A public, open forum regarding Prospect Ridge.
Once we have more information, which is why we're
I think the problem was the feasibility study was done. We got $50,000 from the state to do a feasibility study on how to do a property.
Right.
And you don't have control of that. So you put the cart before the horse, and I think that is the issue.
Control by the board of selectmen that before they would consider, so that it's the cart before the horse and the horse before the cart. So the board of selectmen told us that they would not consider the property until we had done the feasibility study.
That's not.
That's not true.
I was at
Exactly.
the feasibility study, as I explained that, you brought before the board of selectmen a very specific plan. The specific plan that called for 150 units with X number of 80%, X number of 30, 60%, 40%, and so on. That was a very specific proposal that you brought. Yeah, and yes, it was. I have it. Okay, go to the tape. Steve was there. Okay, so that's what you get. No, Steve, you weren't there. So, Sean was there.
It's misinformation. Sorry, it's misinformation. I'll tell you why. Just let me
finish and you tell me where I'm wrong, okay? Because I said, how did I vote at that meeting? Do you recall?
You voted no.
And why did I vote no? Because it was a feasibility study on a specific program, on a specific property, on a specific plan. And I said what we should be looking at was a marketing plan. First of all, we don't have control of the property. Okay, so if you're going to do a feasibility study, generally the protocol would be you would have control of the property. Then you do the study based on your proposal. And that's what that was done. It was a feasibility study, and that's what you were given the grant.
Right, we were given the grant to do a feasibility study.
On your proposal.
No.
Your plan.
Bob, listen. You have a document that's fine, bring it up. It was a hypothetical distribution if, and I'm sorry to get into the weeds here, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's going on. We presented a proposal that said, here's what could be hypothetically built on it. Let us do a feasibility study to determine what could and what should be there. We specifically told by the board of selectmen that this was not approval to use the land. This was just approval to do the feasibility study. Once we came back with the feasibility study, then site control would be discussed. That's the way it is.
So, again, that would have been, I hate to split hairs over here, but that's a market study that you probably should have done. Not a feasibility study on a specific proposal.
But the feasibility study is part of the market study. We haven't done a feasibility study yet. We've done a limited site suitability study to decide if it's worth it going ahead.
Was it $50,000 spent on the whole thing?
I'm sorry, let's continue this out.
Was it $50,000 spent on the site fund?
It wasn't spent, it spent $3,000.
Okay, so you still have $47,000?
Yes.
Well, the suggestion you guys go outside. Because I think the issue here, again, I think we're working in two levels, unfortunately. Some people are here for the full housing plan, which is the bigger picture, longer term, and then I understand there are a number of questions on the Prospect Ridge. And I'm trying to put the notes here tonight. The gentleman who's been speaking for about as long as I have.
Thank you.
Please, you're next.
I have a kind of a out-of-the-box suggestion, and that is to think about your housing needs in Ridgefield as though there was no 830G. 830G, I think, first of all, 10% is arbitrary, it's capricious, one size does not fit all. 10% is the right number for Connecticut, but it's not the right number for Ridgefield. And if you look at all the towns in Connecticut, half of them have a affordable housing percentage. The median is 4.19. So most of them, half of them are, down where we are. And if you looked at the affordable housing percentage in all the towns, and you looked at the poverty rate in all the towns, you would find that it's highly correlated. Affordable housing tends to go where the poverty is. And you can say, well, maybe the poverty goes where the housing is. I mean, I don't know. I ordered a chicken and egg the other day from Amazon to see which one comes first. But the fact is if you took 830G out of your mind and say, let's do what's best for Ridgefield. What does Ridgefield really need? His numbers about people who are in Alice or whatever his numbers are, that's a good starting place. But starting out saying we've got to put 900 units in, the 830G is a false thing. For one thing, big stick is that a developer is going to come in and put something someplace that you don't want it because of 830G. It's an investment. It would be crazy to put it in a high-income town that doesn't need it. I mean, affordable housing tends to go where it's needed. Investors are smart enough to know that they're going to invest in a place when there's demand. You have to look at what the demand is, what the demand's going to be, and then make that decision and forget about 830G. I mean, it's just not the place to start. It might be a place to end. It might be a checkbox, but it's not what you ought to be spending your time on.
Yes, sir. Good evening. My name is Greg Tomascala, and I am a member of the Board of Finance, and I am not here in that capacity this evening. I, however, am someone that grew up with it. And by the grace of God and a lot of hard work, I'm still here. I'm going to vocalize something that I haven't quite heard tonight. As a child, growing up on Round Lake Road, there was a baseball field called Satcham Field. It's still there. Many a summer day was spent on Satcham Field. It's a natural resource that Ridgefield has and a lot of towns don't. As I take that train to New York City, south and west of here, to go to my job, I watched the baseball field get destroyed and a high-rise building was put up. That field was gone. Once we lose it, it'll never come back. Tear down that Prospect Woods, you tear down whatever you want to tear down, go outside tonight. Smell the air of Ridgefield, you'll lose it. It'll be gone. It'll be gone. Our natural resources are one of the most critical aspects to this town. They must be preserved. They must be respected. And please be careful where you're putting these facilities.
All right, anyhow, we're getting close to our 9 o'clock. Is there anything that you have?
I just think that a lot, I'm Tony Corley. I believe that a lot of the confusion and ideas that people have are based on the fact that I'm not seeing a lot of organization here yet. It's not a criticism at all. I'm assuming you have an organization. You have someone in charge of understanding the whole town of Ridgefield, every house and every building that's in it. And you have a vision given this that you need to consider a lot of what people just said here, but also a very long-term vision. And I was joking with Gloria with an organization, with an engineer, with whatever other experts we need. But I haven't seen that in the presentation. I don't. Maybe you have it, maybe you don't, but it might be the next time you present, you might want to present the organization, the expertise that you're using the long-term vision.
Thank you. So what first you've already spoken yet, your next
Just one quick question on this 830G, the developers, who makes sure that they are compliant?
When the application is submitted, staff has historically been very careful making sure that they meet statutory criteria, because it's not until they've shown or proven that they get this 830G protection if you want the application.
But see, 830G protection, but then they have to rent the places, I say. They comply with, they can't even 60, even down to 30% MIs, or?
So what happens is, as part of this application, they're required to submit what's called an affordability plan. And again, that was a little bit of, wild west in town now has a standard plan that developers are required to follow or declare why they feel they should modify it. And the town now requires the use of an approved administrator, which is generally a third party, unless you're a developer who has an accomplished accounting staff or you're familiar with this, in which case you can do it. So the town has instituted procedures to monitor during the course of this period so that it makes sure
the town instituted procedures to monitor, so who's monitoring?
The Planning and Zoning Commission maintains a list of all of the properties under 8-3G and requires every year that they submit an application that they are compliant. If they are in violation, it's considered a zoning violation. It's very, very weak teeth in this law. And they are subject to penalties through the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Do they have a audit to make sure that the application is true, or?
I don't know the answer to that. I know they're collecting the information. I know that there's smart applicants. So I think that the landlord is not likely to put him or herself at risk. But there have been issues with compliance in the past. For example, some things have been sold that were not allowed. They were sold in marked ways that we shouldn't have been. This was before the level of compliance that exists now.
You were trying to justify. So there's such a kaleidoscope of different state and federal programs in terms of financing. So an assisted housing project may not be 100% affordable units, most of them tend to be, but sometimes they are not. So I can't really comment on. I think that part of the challenge for some of housing authorities can be the economics, depending on the level of affordability and the rents that are being received. You also have the expense side of the equation. And if the rents are not covering expenses, how does that shortfall get made up? Some cases there can be state or federal funding, and in other cases they have decided that there's just not enough state and federal funding. And so some of the units are charged market rate to generate cash flow to subsidize the other units. So, I mean, is it? That's a good question. I have the state spreadsheet that tells the number of units, but I've not actually compared that to the number of units on the site, right? So that's a great question. I'm going to write that down. I'll take a look at it. So thank you very much. I think there was something else that came up, but not so good.
Oh, I'm sorry.
complete community, but again, it's a sort of professional jargon phrase, we use the second paragraph here. Complete communities mean basically to all people through a diverse mix of housing types, a diverse mix of land use relevant to residents' daily lives. So it's not just a residential community, there's one situation there. Activities located within walking distance of each other where possible, and the availability of transportation options. So it's a holistic view of sort of contained neighborhoods and complete communities. So, I mean, looking at it as I didn't check the source, but it's.
I think it's with the media.
No, it is Wikipedia. I did notice in the article that the spelling, some of the spelling is so, it could have been. I'm sorry, is there anyone else who has not spoken yet? Would you like to go here tonight? All right, we're down to 1 or 2 minutes left, so who wants to go? Okay, 3 people, so go ahead. So the question first, slide on there. The second is the State Department of Housing, what we call regional planning, so I've heard of them. It is a group based out of New York, it's a nonprofit group. They created a report in November of last year called the Framework for Affordable Housing Plans or something like that. And so if you can remember enough of that to search for it, it's the framework. You get a picture of that.
I mean, I think we're supposed to be the way for it.
Yeah,
it's hard to do that.
Thank you much. Take care of that. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the question I have is determine the need for housing. So you have percentage of people that, I forget, whatever you. Right, so you would say that percentage of people need housing.
I mean, an indication of need. I mean, some people are quite comfortable in the scenario they find themselves in, even if they're housing purpose. So the issue is need needs to be sort of an artful term rather than a scientific term. These are measures of need, and housing cost burden is one of them. So I think as we assemble the report, we will provide this information, provide the sources for it, so that we can have a robust discussion about what factors that is.
But that would say how many units are needed in our town or across. I know you don't like.
No, I mean, I think the questions are being, there are studies floating around the state of Connecticut that identify housing needs using different metrics, and they would likely say that Ridgefield needs thousands of units.
Right, but when the units are completed, anyone is eligible to live there. So my question is, how do you define the need is that? You're saying so many people need units, and then.
So we'll talk through. So hang on a second. Gentleman back is not spoken yet. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for this. Just to follow up with the young lady. So do you have a actual number of people that are on like a list for affordable housing in Ridgefield?
We're not at the inventory or waiting list stage. We do know the housing authority.
So again, then how do we know how many units that we actually need?
There is a waiting list.
At the housing authority,
There's a waiting list of Valley.
that's a housing authority. Right, I'm saying that the housing authority maintains a list. That's what I was trying to say. That they have that. The question is, there are people who are not elderly or disabled or otherwise eligible for housing authority units, but the need still exists. So this concept of need is not just who signed up, it's also people who have not signed up because they don't qualify for that type of scenario. So
We really don't know.
I think the issue is that where we do have that indication of what is the waiting list, we should report that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have some sort of number on this.
So I think, yes, would you like to go first?
I don't know. I'll go quick.
We do private procedures for it.
So, one of my concerns that we talked about the availability of transportation options, and we do not have multiple transportation options. essentially these cars live in the town. We have no busing service, we have no train service. That's in Ridgefield. So I appreciate the work that you're all doing on this, especially you, I do. You know, whether we all disagree, you're putting in time. But these are very concrete questions that we need to have answers to in order to have an effective plan. So I'm concerned, so in your planning, I would say sooner than later, can you discuss what arrangements you're making to offer transportation to people who may come to live here to work, who don't have a car? Like, are we going to start a bus service? Like when we started having municipal busing, like to get around town and to get around, so without it, and finally, the new zoning thing, laws from the state are allowing people to require housing or building a certain percent that do not require parking requirements to go with each unit. Right now, we're doing affordable units that have specific parking number requirements. And new requirements from the state are saying they're going to exempt some of those parking requirements, so we could essentially take people putting in buildings that aren't required to put in the pertinent parking spaces for people's cars. And that can also be a problem in this area. So I hope you address that and address this one. So people wouldn't be able to park on the street or, like, where would they park? If you picture the little Toyota building on Gilbert, right?
I understand your question. I have to explain it.
I just wanted to end, I know where you're going, should go. I own a beautiful house in Ridgefield. I've been in Ridgefield for almost 30 years now. I love this town like I've never loved any place in life. I want to know that when the time comes that I retire and I can afford to keep living, or I don't want to keep living in the house that I'm living now, that I can move somewhere in Ridgefield and stay here for the rest of my life. And I think there's this feeling that if we build affordable housing, or if there is more housing available for people that is affordable, that it's going to bring in people that we don't want here. They should live somewhere else. I want to live here. And I don't have to move to somewhere else when my circumstances change. So I appreciate your work. Love it to be a little more $400, but for you, because I want to stay here. The taxpayers be the first ones off.
I think that's one of the things we're